I never thought my 30th birthday would begin with a cold punch to the heart. Not a slap, not a shout, but simply a suitcase. I had just returned to my home in Ridgeway, Ohio, a small town with long autumns and streets lined with golden leaves. In my hands was a tiny birthday cake hastily bought from a roadside grocery near the base. The vanilla frosting was overly thick, and the words "Happy Birthday Olivia" were scrawled in a shaky, left-handed script. I hadn't planned anything grand, just thought that, if everyone forgot, at least I'd remember. I was alive, present, and deserving of something small. But that suitcase wasn't small. It was neatly placed at the doorstep, a quiet but sharp message. You don't belong here anymore. No one came out to greet me. No welcome home, no smiles, no smell of dinner. The house was dark except for the kitchen light glowing, as if to prove they were still there, just no room left for me. I stepped inside the autumn wind whistling through the slightly open door. Inside, my father Richard sat at the dining table holding his familiar glass of bourbon. My mother Vera quietly cleared the last dish. Neither looked up. Neither asked about the cake in my hands. "I'm back," I said, my voice hoarse and low. Dad didn't turn, just said words I'd never forget 30 years old. "Time for you to move out." No birthday wishes. No questions. Just an order like in the barracks. But in the military, at least, I had comrades superiors who understood loyalty deserved trust in return. Here in the home, I once believed was my anchor. I was just a stranger who'd overstayed. I placed the cake on the kitchen counter. It slipped slightly from my hands, tilting the frosting, smearing onto the plastic bag. I didn't speak, didn't question. I'd learned long ago that arguing in this house was pointless. Why they no longer needed me didn't matter. They just needed me gone. Mom glanced up briefly, then looked away. Maybe she wanted to say something. Maybe not. She was always like that, half protecting, half afraid to confront. Her whole life was a prolonged compromise, and I was always the part traded away. I took off my coat, hung it on the hook by the door, and silently dragged the suitcase to my room. Everything was the same bed, neatly made lamp by the window, a few photos from my Air Force days on the wall. But everything was also different, because this room was no longer a place I was allowed to belong to. I sat on the bed's edge, opened the suitcase. Some clothes were neatly folded by Mom, others clearly stuffed in haste. Among them were my old military boots and the uniform I'd worn for 6 years of service. My mind spun. I remembered when Dad broke a tooth in a drunken stumble, and I paid the dentist bill with savings meant for a car. The winter Mom skidded on ice, and I took leave to buy her new tires and call a tow. The time the roof leaked, and I climbed up in the rain to fix it, while Dad grumbled indoors about contractor prices. No one ever thanked me. I didn't expect it. I just thought if I tried hard enough, quietly enough, patiently enough, they'd see. But now I knew some people never see, unless they're using you. I didn't cry. Didn't scream. As a soldier, I'd learned to stay calm under fire. This was just another kind of wound. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app. My fingers moved quickly, decisively. I transferred my next month's salary to a separate account, canceled automatic payments for the house bills. Not out of revenge, but to survive. The birthday cake sat on the counter. Part of the frosting was smudged, the words "Happy Birthday," now just "Happy Bert." I stood, opened the window, the autumn breeze carrying the damp smell of fallen leaves. I knew I'd leave soon. No farewell needed. No tears. Just one choice for myself. Under the soft glow of the desk lamp, I opened the suitcase and began folding what remained, not just clothes, but fragments of memories I'd kept. Some I'd take. Some I'd leave like loyalty misplaced. Tomorrow I'd go. But tonight, my birthday, I'd sit here one last time. And when I closed the door behind me, I wouldn't look back. I used to think the greatest pain came from war. I believed nothing was more bitter than the fear of life and death on the training ground, where gunfire mixed with heartbeats. But it turns out the deepest hurt isn't from bombs or bullets. It's the silence of family when they decide you're no longer worth anything to them. The morning after my birthday, Ridgeway was as quiet as ever. The autumn wind swept through old porches, carrying the musty smell of smoke and chimneys into every corner. I sat on the bed's edge, back against the wall, holding a cold coffee mug. On my phone screen, a list of bills glowed like an indictment, the things I'd paid for over the years, believing it was what a daughter should do. Electricity, water, internet, car insurance, cable TV. I remembered every due date, every late payment I covered to keep the house from going dark in winter. I remembered Dad in his armchair ranting about interrupted TV signals, throwing the remote at the wall like it was my fault. No one but me knew the roof once leaked so badly. Water dripped through the electrical outlet. I climbed up one March afternoon, freezing rain stinging as I hammered, trembling. Dad was inside drinking beer, muttering about crooked contractors. I don't recall him thanking me. Probably not. 2 winters ago, Mom skidded on ice. She called me in a panic during my shift at Dayton Base. I took leave, drove home at night, and bought her new tires the next morning. The $800 tow and tire bill came from savings, meant for officer training. Mom only said softly, "You're so good, like your dad when he was young." But Dad never paid for her tires. When Dad broke a tooth in a drunken fall, I took him to the dentist and paid over $200. He came home, said nothing. I didn't ask for thanks. But last night, when he called me a freeloader, those payments danced in my head, laced with the bitter sting of trampled self-respect. Honestly, in the Air Force, I never felt pain like this. There was order, rules. Superiors acknowledged effort. Comrades shared the last ration. Harsh as it was, I never felt invisible. But at home, I existed as a shadow, seen only when needed. I set the coffee down, opened my laptop. The screen lit up, displaying every account in my name. I created a new spreadsheet titled Withdrawal. First line electric bill $98 monthly. Next internet $79. Cable $63, gas $42. Car insurance $156 for both cars. I typed each line, heart sinking, but hands steady. Each expense was a time I cut my own needs to keep them comfortable. How many trips I canceled, reunions I missed over time, I declined just to ensure they didn't lack. Sometimes I wondered, was it duty or a hope for recognition? Probably both. And that was what humiliated me most. They never asked, yet I always gave. I opened each service's website, familiar interfaces, before I logged in to pay for them. Today was different. I moved the cursor to the first cancel auto pay button, electricity. My heart slowed. My hand trembled slightly. 1 click, confirm. The system flashed, auto pay canceled. A thread snapped. I continued. Internet, cable, gas, insurance. Each click was a whisper, I choose myself. When I finished, I looked at the spreadsheet. Every entry read, canceled. I didn't feel entirely relieved, but I felt clearer. This was what I should have done long ago. Some say forgiveness is the act of the strong. But before forgiving, you must stop letting others hurt you. As I closed the laptop outside the window, the wind carried the first winter leaves. I drew the curtains, no longer wanting to see that house. No longer waiting for someone to see me with understanding. I'd seen myself clearly long enough. Tomorrow I'd leave. But first, I discovered something my parents didn't know. Something they forgot and I didn't. A legal secret that could change the game. I left that house on a foggy morning. No goodbyes. No one saw me off. Just the sound of suitcase wheels on cold tiles, and the soft click of the front door closing behind me. For the last time. Nora waited in the car. My best friend, a former combat medic from an Afghanistan mission, now worked at a town clinic. When I opened the car door, she didn't ask questions, just handed me a hot coffee. I held it in both hands, the warmth of the bitter black liquid, a reminder I was still alive, and that was enough to start again. Nora's apartment was on the 2nd floor of an old house, the wooden floor creaking with every step. But it had warm golden light, the faint scent of cinnamon from her daily incense, and best of all, no scolding voices echoing from the kitchen. The first morning there, I woke before the sun. A strange emptiness filled me, as if my body hadn't adjusted to freedom. But there was another feeling, subtler, calmer. I no longer had to be on guard. I brewed coffee, set my phone on the kitchen table, and looked out the window. A new message from Tyler, the only cousin I still kept in touch with, popped up. "Power's out at the house. Uncle Richard's yelling up the neighborhood. Neighbors are watching." I didn't laugh or cry. Just felt a calm sadness like wind through an empty room. I knew this would happen. No one was paying their bills anymore. No one was shielding them from consequences. Tyler sent another Aunt Vera's sitting on the porch not talking. Neighbors are asking why you left. I didn't say anything, but they're starting to figure it out. I pictured it. Mom, the woman who refused to stand by me when I needed her most, sitting in the cold morning shade staring blankly at bare trees. It didn't make me gloat. It just confirmed I was right to leave. I spent the morning sorting my few belongings. A suitcase, some old uniforms, a notebook, a few photos, my laptop. Each item recalled a piece of the old me I was leaving behind. There was a photo of me with my parents at the house's gate, taken after I graduated officer training. In it, I stood tall in my uniform, smiling with hope. Dad had his arm around me, Mom held my hand. Anyone would believe we were a loving family, but now I knew sometimes photos are just a shell for something rotting inside. That afternoon, Nora brought sandwiches and we ate on the living room floor. She asked, "You okay?" I shook my head. Not okay, but not bad. Just strange. Strange not to endure. She nodded. Strange is the first step to freedom. I sat quietly long after she washed the dishes and went to her room. My mind replayed mornings at work, evenings at the market, timely bill payments, all circling a house I could no longer call home. I opened my laptop. The blue-white light lit the table. I started a new email subject line. "You kicked me out, now it's my turn to leave." I didn't know who I was writing to. Maybe my parents. Maybe myself. I wrote line by line. I'm not writing to blame. Just to remind. I carried everything. When the power was cut, I called. When the water stopped, I called. When the car broke down, I called. When the roof leaked, I climbed. When the doctor sent bills, I paid silently. When Mom cried, I wiped her tears. When Dad yelled, I endured. When both were silent, I was still there. That was me, your daughter, but I'm not there anymore, and this time I won't call. I read it again. It felt like throwing a stone into a lake, silence at first, then ripples spreading. I didn't send it, just saved it to drafts, not out of fear, but because I needed one more thing, a piece of evidence I'd just recalled. There was a detail I'd overlooked, a legal fact they didn't expect, and maybe, just maybe, it would be the key to reclaiming the power they thought they'd taken. I discovered I was still on the house's deed, just when I thought I had no ties left to that place. The truth came quietly, not with alarms, but like a wisp of smoke rising from ashes, thought long cold. A small flame, but enough to reignite what I thought I'd buried. It started when I began organizing my financial records. I'm not good at forgetting, so I kept copies of old mortgage contracts, payment receipts, bank transfers, everything I'd paid for my parents. I gathered them into a thin folder, planning to send it to the Veterans Legal Aid Office to cut any remaining ties and avoid future trouble. The lawyer on duty was Jenna Lee, a Korean-American woman in her 40s, sharp-spoken with bright, direct eyes that seemed to read thoughts. She reviewed my file, nodded slightly, and asked, "You co-signed this refinancing contract?" I nodded. 5 years ago. The house was about to be foreclosed. I co-signed to help them keep it. Jenna frowned, flipped to the contract's last page. She turned her laptop toward me, opened Ohio's public property records portal. A few keystrokes and Olivia Carter appeared under legal co-owner. I went silent. "You never signed over your ownership share to them?" Jenna asked, eyes on the screen. I shook my head, heart racing. Never. I didn't think it was still valid. "It is," Jenna said calmly. "They can't sell the house without your signature." I sat frozen on the hard plastic chair, feeling pulled back to that silent night when I walked away believing they held all the power. But a part of that house that warped home still belonged to me. Not because they gave it, but because I paid for it. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, then found out you held the key? If so, share in the comments. Maybe sometimes we forget our own worth until someone reminds us with the truth. Jenna helped me print the full record, stamped for verification. "You have 2 options," she said. 1, stay quiet. 2, step up and stop them if they're selling. I brought the file to Nora's, set it on the table, and stared at it all afternoon. A thin stack of paper heavy as stone. I didn't know what I felt, anger, pain, or something colder I couldn't name. Just then Tyler called, his voice hushed. "They're listing the house live. Saw it on the town's real estate page. Below market value. Probably need cash fast." I closed my eyes. Part of me wasn't surprised. Dad never cared for rules, and Mom? She just followed. But another part of me tightened. They wanted to sell. Without asking me. Though they knew, or once knew, my name was on the deed. I opened the draft email from the day before. Not enough. I needed more than a warning. I needed a clear sign I was done staying silent. That night I sat at the screen starting over a concise, firm legal letter, not showy. I stated I was a legal co-owner. I demanded they stop any sale, or I'd report to local authorities and sue if needed. I attached copies of the deed mortgage contract and payment records I'd made years before. I hit send at 11:03 p.m. 3 minutes later, no reply. 5 minutes, still none. 12 minutes later, my phone rang. I didn't answer. They called 3 more times that night. No voicemails. I just stared at the flashing screen, each call blinking out. I thought of what they'd say. That I was betraying them. That I was ungrateful. That I should let them handle their affairs. But I also thought of the freezing winter nights I fixed pipes on the porch. The late nights paying their debts. The comrades who asked, "Why do you keep sending money when no one calls to thank you?" The answer was because I loved my family. But now I loved my freedom more, because sometimes that's all it takes to reignite a flame, the last one in your heart. I didn't know what they'd do tomorrow. Cancel the sale, argue back, beg attack. I only knew for the first time in years I wasn't afraid. And then something unexpected happened. The next day, Tyler sent a screenshot Dad was posting on Facebook, accusing me of stealing ownership, turning on family, causing their hardship. And I didn't react like before. I laughed. I thought I'd cut ties. Walked away coldly decisive, choosing freedom without emotional baggage except self-respect. But some things like blood in your veins can't be fully severed. That morning, as I brewed tea in Nora's kitchen, my phone buzzed with a single text from Tyler Banks foreclosing soon. They hid it, but I heard from a notary friend. Maybe next week. I sat silently in Nora's kitchen, clutching a cold coffee mug. Before me wasn't the phone screen, but the image of the old brick house with its sloped roof I'd patched in the rain, the kitchen I'd cooked in on winter nights when I'd just paid to restore power. I didn't want to go back. Didn't want to save them only to be pushed out again, discarded like an old coat. But the thought of the house being seized, my parents, however cold, wrong, cruel, thrown onto the street, twisted my heart. I opened my laptop. Logged into the secondary account I'd set up years ago, a private fund separate from anything they knew. It was my dream of a small apartment with a balcony overlooking a park or river. Now that dream might have to wait. I looked up the debt details. As Tyler said, the bank had sent a final notice. A payment of over $13,000 would clear it. That amount would save them from foreclosure, from homelessness in the coming winter. I sat for a long time before the final confirmation. Are you sure you want to transfer? Yes. I was sure. But I didn't want them to know. Didn't want them to think I'd come back. Didn't want them to assume I was still ready when they called me debtor, freeloader, traitor. I entered the payment under an anonymous trust account hiding the sender's identity. I didn't need them to know. I just needed to know I didn't become like them, callous, selfish, rejecting. When I hit send, the screen flashed payment successful. Processed at 10:47 a.m. today. I sat still, hands on the keyboard. No music, no magical light. Just me, a woman who'd traded another piece of her dream to keep a roof over those who threw her out. Nora walked in a sweater in hand, but her dark brown eyes paused on my face. Without asking much, she set the sweater on a chair and poured tea. I just did something, I said, my voice eerily calm. About the old house, Nora asked. I nodded. She sat across, not surprised, not accusing. Did you leave your name? I shook my head. No. I didn't want them to know. I just couldn't let them lose everything. Nora looked at me for a long time, then said, You won't regret it. I thought honest with myself. I didn't do it because they deserve it. I did it because I don't want my heart to close like theirs did to me. Nora nodded. No more words. We drank tea in silence, not heavy, but a wordless empathy. Days later, Tyler texted bank stopped foreclosure. Someone paid the final amount. Parents are confused, don't know who. They think maybe grandma or a miracle. I smiled faintly. No miracle. Just a daughter once called a freeloader who couldn't ignore her parents facing homelessness. I didn't reply. Didn't confirm. Didn't deny. Just kept living, keeping my heart soft, despite the scars. When I closed the laptop, I felt lighter. I didn't need them to know. But I knew, and that was enough. The next dawn, I woke early. The sky was foggy, the sun not yet over the horizon. I stood at Nora's small living room window, my temporary anchor, and realized I'd never dared forgive. But today, at least, I held no resentment. The world kept turning. The old house still stood, though its owners didn't know who saved it. And I, the one who thought she'd left forever, was still finding a way not to lose herself. I turned, grabbed my coat. A new path waited. But before I moved on, something unexpected knocked. A letter, handwritten in a script I couldn't mistake. From Vera, my mother. I slowly opened the envelope, heart tightening. Could it be A belated apology, written by hand. I wasn't expecting anything that morning. As usual, I woke early, brewed ginger tea, and sat by the window watching November's hazy light drape over the neighbors' roofs. When Nora brought in the mail, I thought it was a bill or ad, but the cream-colored envelope bore handwriting I couldn't mistake Mom's. I touched the envelope's edge. In that moment, my hands were cold. I wondered if I should open it. But then I thought if she had the courage to write, I should have the courage to read. I took the envelope to my room, closed the door. No lights. Just the dim morning glow and my heartbeat loud and bothersome. I opened it with scissors, pulling out a handwritten sheet folded twice in faded blue ink. My wrist trembled as I opened the first page. Olivia, I'm not writing to justify. I know it's too late for that. I just want at least once in my life to tell the truth. I read each line, each word like a needle. Mom wrote about her youth, her fear of poverty, her fear of failing as a mother, about how she used control instead of love, not knowing another way to keep me close. I didn't protect you from your father, and I didn't protect you from myself. That was wrong, and there's no undoing it. But I remember every time you quietly helped. I knew I just never had the courage to say thank you. I set the letter down, back against the wall. No immediate tears, just an emptiness, like hearing an old recording I didn't remember making. I read it twice, 3 times. Each time I noticed small details, how she wrote you instead of that girl like before. How she didn't ask me to come back, didn't say I had to forgive, didn't mention the payment that saved their house. No demands, no bargaining. Just a mother for the first time writing to her daughter with what little was left in her heart. I cried. Not from weakness, but because I'd waited so long for this. And when it came, I was no longer the girl waiting for her mom by the window. I was a woman who'd stepped out of that shadow, who knew how to let go of resentment. I didn't text back, didn't write a reply, didn't message. Because forgiveness sometimes isn't in words, but in choosing not to repeat the cycle of hurt. That night I went to the back porch of Nora's apartment. No wind. I brought the letter, placed it on the small metal dish I used for incense. I struck a match, lit it. The paper, curled, blackened, turned to ash. I watched the small flame consume words I'd memorized, not because I hated my mother, but because I needed to be free from memories that held me too long. As the letter burned to ash, I felt lighter. Not quite peace, but unbound. No open questions, no silent midnight arguments. I went back inside, closed the door, and knew this was likely the first and last time my mother was honest. I used to think if I stayed quiet enough, the world would leave me alone. I was wrong. For some, silence isn't peace. It's a void they fill with accusations. That morning, as I brewed tea in the kitchen, Nora walked in with a white envelope, her face tense. I took it, flipped it over a seal from the local law office. My first feeling wasn't fear, but exhaustion. I was tired of always having to prove I wasn't wrong. I opened it, skimmed the dry text, and saw a familiar name in bold under plaintiff Richard Carter. My father. Reason for the lawsuit: financial abuse, neglect of elderly parents causing damage to shared property. I laughed, a dry, unfamiliar sound. After all I'd done, paying power bills, fixing the roof, covering property taxes, I was now accused of abandonment. You okay? Nora asked, standing beside me, eyes thoughtful. I folded the paper, set it on the table. Not surprised, just disappointed. Even though I told myself not to expect anything. She placed a hand on my shoulder, squeezed lightly. If you want, we'll respond. Don't let them rewrite your story. I nodded. I knew I wouldn't back down. Not this time. I went to the Veterans Legal Aid office where Jenna Lee worked. She greeted me with knowing eyes. I told her everything from co-signing the mortgage years ago to the recent payment to save the house. We'll countersue, Jenna said after reviewing the file. Financial abuse, I've never seen someone sued for saving a house with their own money. We gathered documents. 2018 roof repair receipts. 2020 utility payment records. Car maintenance bills. Bank statements showing mortgage interest I paid. Each paper was a piece of truth proof I existed, though they tried to erase me. Tyler helped too. He dug up old emails, texts I sent, asking for bill photos, chats where he told me they couldn't pay the doctor last year. There was even a recording of Mom's desperate call for help, which I'd kept to remember I was once needed. You don't need to do this because they deserve it, Tyler said, handing me a printed file. But because if you don't, they'll retell your story to make you someone you're not. I knew he was right. I'd endured thinking patience was noble, but now I understood. silence doesn't save the truth. Only action does. 3 weeks later, my countersuit file was complete. 73 pages of evidence, each page a marker of love-endurance sacrifice, without a word of recognition. I signed the final page line reading Defendant Olivia Carter. For the first time, I wasn't ashamed of that name. That night, I walked the small path behind the building. Fallen autumn leaves glowed gold under streetlights. I looked up at the sky, few stars, but calm. And I realized this was no longer about my parents. It was about me standing up, not just to protect myself, but to establish the truth I'd lived. I'd stayed silent for years. Ignored insults, overlooked unfair treatment, played the obedient daughter, sacrificing quietly without a word. But when Dad unilaterally sued me, spreading through town that I was an ungrateful child, I knew it was time for the truth. I logged into a social media account I used for military news and started writing. The post wasn't long, but heavy. I didn't claim victimhood, didn't name anyone. I just recounted, with numbers, images, hard evidence, utility bills I paid, roof repair receipts, photos of the kitchen I repainted before enlisting. I attached scans of originals, bank records, payment schedules, medical center confirmations, all bearing my name as the payer. I wrote one final line. Silence doesn't mean absence. I did things not for recognition, but now they need to be said. Justice doesn't need to shout it, just needs to stand. I hit post at 8:12 a.m. At first a few likes, then shares, then comments from people I didn't expect remembered me. She helped fix my car when I was stuck in the snow. Mr. Tom, my old physics teacher. I remember her working at the gas station by my house. She brought food to her mom mid-shift. Ms. Howard, a former neighbor. Olivia fixed my roof during the 2019 storm. I still have a photo of her in uniform climbing with a broken ladder. Each comment was a drop washing away the dirt they'd thrown on me. Slowly, those who believed my parents began to doubt, then react. Can't believe she did all that and was treated this way. I thought she abandoned them. Turns out she was pushed out. I'm sorry for believing one side. This town owes her an apology. I read each line, not to reclaim honor, but to know I was no longer distorted in their false tales. 3 days later, Jenna called. Olivia, I got word from their lawyer. They're offering to withdraw the suit. I paused. Did they apologize? No. But we can counter-sue. With the evidence, we can sue for defamation, spreading false information, causing harm. And Jenna hesitated. If you want, you could seek compensation. I looked out the window. It was raining. Drops tapped the glass like whispers of something coming. I hadn't answered Jenna. Hadn't said if I'd sue back. But I knew one thing from this moment. I wouldn't let anyone else tell my story their way. And you know when you don't need to shout, but others still listen. That's when the truth is loud enough to stand on its own. No one's fully prepared for their first hearing, maybe not even in a lifetime. Despite dozens of grueling military trainings facing death on missions, when I stepped into the county sheriff's office, my heart still faltered. The hearing room was small fluorescent lights casting a cold glow on the steel table and papers. Richard was there, face red, arms crossed. Vera sat beside him, hands clasped under the table. She looked much smaller. I walked in carrying 2 thick folders. I set them before the legal officer and said, I'm here to provide the truth. The hearing began. They questioned Richard first, why he filed what grounds compared to my evidence. He started strong, claiming reasonable suspicion. But when they showed signed receipts bills with my name, he faltered. Now he only said I thought she'd cut ties. Vera sat silent as if weighed down. When questioned, she just cried. I didn't know my daughter did so much. I thought I was getting back at her. The officer looked at them, stating clearly, with the evidence and witnesses, we'll forward this to court if the plaintiff doesn't withdraw, and then the plaintiff will face a countersuit for defamation. I said nothing the whole time, just placed my folders before the inspector and stayed silent. The silence of someone who'd fought to protect herself to the end. When I stepped out of the sheriff's office, Nora was waiting outside. Cool air, a gentle breeze. For the first time in years, I felt my steps light head high. I used to think freedom was something grand a line in discharge papers, or the moment you leave the final training camp. Turns out real freedom is the day you flip on your room's light without fear of being yelled at. Choosing your own bedsheet color, hanging a painting you love despite others calling it ugly. Placing an old birthday cake on a shelf not to eat, but to remember. I moved into a small apartment near the West Airport. I bought used furniture from a veterans donation center. I painted the walls myself a deep blue bolder than I'd planned, but richer for it. Each day I added a detail, a picture frame, a cactus pot, a quote by the door. Every crack is proof you existed. I placed the hardened birthday cake on a wooden shelf by the window. The cake I'd bought late on my 30th birthday alone, uncelebrated. I kept it not for sentiment, but as a marker. A marker I survived the darkest point and chose to keep going. 4 days after settling in, I received an anonymous card. No sender, just a short note. You weren't the problem. They were just afraid they couldn't control you. I read it 3 times. Each time felt like a rush. Who sent it? Tyler, Nora, or someone who read my post online. I didn't know, and didn't need to. Because for the first time in years, I sat in my own chair, one I chose in a color I liked, with no one criticizing, and felt completely, utterly myself. I brewed ginger tea, opened the window to the breeze. The sounds of life outside, cars, music from the next apartment, a cat meowing below, didn't make me feel lost. They were signs I'd left the gray zone called unconditional sacrifice. I smiled, softly but real. I became the person I once dreamed of. Not a hero. Not a perfect daughter. Just a person who rose from the bottom, held on to dignity, without needing applause. A person, free. I thought I'd never return to the old town streets where fragments of a buried past lay. But autumn came with clear air and gentle sunlight drawing me back. The annual fall festival was held at the town square. The smell of roasted pumpkin popcorn and apple jam was as tempting as childhood memories. I wandered through the crowd, cold enough for a jacket, warm with sunlight. I didn't hide, but didn't seek anyone. People sometimes paused to look at me, and oddly, no one turned away. Is that Olivia Ms. Wilson from the bookstore? You held my stuff at the 2017 festival, remember? The kids still talk about how no one knew who brought pumpkins to the club. I just smiled. It had been long since I felt welcomed without calculation. I stopped at an apple cider stand sipping when an old woman passed, paused, and placed a hand on my shoulder. Her eyes were small, bright, beyond expectation. You deserve more love than that, she said, then walked on. I stood holding my cider, her words filling cracks I thought had dried. I'd forgiven, not because they deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry that weight anymore. The freedom I found came when I learned to let go of what suffocated me. I smiled, nodded. No one knew, but I'd forgiven in my heart. This year's birthday came like a breath. No more holding a small cake on the porch, no more words cold as snow. A year had passed, and I was still here. Alive. And for the first time I felt I was truly starting to live. I held a small birthday party at my apartment. Nora arrived early with a bouquet of vibrant sunflowers. Tyler brought a bottle of wine, the kind I couldn't afford last year. A few new friends from art class, and the volunteer group joined. No one came out of duty. No one pretended to care. It was all real. I prepared my first proper birthday cake in years. Not a discounted rock-hard one, not missing candles, not tossed on a table to be done with. A cool lemon cake, lightly frosted in white. On it, 31 candles stood straight. We laughed, ate, played music. People talked about plans, trips, the coming winter. No one mentioned the past. No one made me feel I had to justify my presence. When the lights dimmed, everyone sang happy birthday. I stood before the cake, watching candlelight flicker in my friend's eyes. I closed my eyes, bowed my head, and whispered a wish. I forgive, but I won't go back. Not a curse, not a cold cut. But the sincerest goodbye I could muster to the past, to those who hurt me, to the me from a year ago. I blew out the candles. The light vanished, and I wasn't afraid. Because for the first time in the dark, I still saw myself clearly. After the party, when everyone left, I washed glasses in the sink, rearranged chairs. On the table, the sunflowers were still fresh. Half the cake remained. I poured more wine, took it to the balcony. Night fell. The city quieted. From the balcony, I looked at twinkling lights. No one watched me from across. No one timed my return. No one silently disapproved of me living as I wanted. I sat in my familiar wicker chair, pulled a thin blanket over my shoulders, leaned back, and I smiled. Not loud, but real. Not a smile to reassure anyone. Not a smile to hide tears. But the smile of someone who'd walked a battered path and knew I didn't need applause to be worthy. Maybe you've had birthdays without cake, without celebration, just you and your wounds. But if you ever throw yourself a birthday again, tell me. I'll be the first to send a heartfelt wish. I looked up at the sky. New birthday, new life. No one's permission needed. No one's understanding required. Just knowing finally I chose to be kind to myself. And that was the greatest gift I'd ever had. In writing this story, I'm not just telling Olivia's journey, but the journey of many of us who've sacrificed silently, been hurt, unknown, tried to live kindly without recognition. Through each chapter, I want to share one thing. Forgiveness isn't acceptance. Leaving isn't failure. And sometimes true freedom comes when you're brave enough to let go of what suffocates you. This story has no miracles, no dramatic twists, just resilience, compassion, and a desire to live true to your worth. If you've carried wounds like Olivia, if you're on a journey to find yourself, leave a comment, share your thoughts. Maybe your story will inspire someone else. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to follow the channel for more journeys to come. Thank you for staying with me to the end.